in those respective conferences. Once selection day comes, in order to be in those quarterfinals, again, you have to have won your conference championship game. Those are the only ones eligible for that. So as you look at it right now, we saw that BYU took a tumble. We saw how they chose to stack up the SEC teams. What's the reaction?
Well, the first thing, I think if you're Tennessee, you got to feel really bad because you see where Alabama's ranked and the fact that you beat Alabama. That's number one. Number two, if you're Indiana, your margin for error is not very big against Ohio State because they have a Penn State team with one loss ahead of you right now. So imagine how they would view you if you had one loss also. And they have a comparable opponent in UCLA. Penn State struggled, Indiana dominated. So I think they're telling Indiana, if you go to Columbus and you don't play well, and this is not a close game, even if you beat Purdue and you're 11-1, you are not guaranteed a playoff spot. Those are the two things that are really jumping out to me.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. Is that as it should be? Would you agree with that given the schedule they've played?
No, Rece, because I go back again. We're looking at Indiana, and we're not used to seeing the IU. Because I go back to last year, Michigan's resume was very similar. When you look at the strength of schedule, when you look at all the metrics, but we gave Michigan the benefit of the doubt. Indiana is not getting that based on the strength of record, and we're coming up all these different reasons why Indiana can't do it. But let's give an opportunity to prove it on the field.
Are we? They're ranked fifth.
That's what I'm saying. They couldn't go anywhere else. You've been saying that since the beginning. And they've been in the playoff since the beginning. They can't go any higher.
They are behind a one-loss team.
They have a chance to go on the road and prove what they are. Now, honestly, if we believe in what our metrics are saying, if I'm Indiana, I don't know if I'm playing Rourke against Ohio State. We've seen what happened to Florida State last year, Jordan Travis. What could keep Indiana out of this? Getting their quarterback hurt. We've seen it happen to Florida State last year, having not played anybody.
Or losing by 30
if you look at 3, 4, and 5, Texas, Penn State, and Indiana, they literally have played nobody between all three teams. The toughest team in that is Vandy. So a lot of this that we're looking at is eye test because Boog, when you look at the resumes of 3, 4, and 5, it brings back the idea of let me not play anybody and be undefeated and be in a good position.
I agree with that.
The eye test is going to matter because 3, 4, 5 have played nobody, and that includes Indiana.
Just piggybacking on the Indiana conversation just for a moment. I think Indiana is in a position this weekend to secure a spot in the playoff. They don't have to win, but they have to look competitive. We cannot use 2023 as a reference point for 2024 anymore. It's not comparable. I've heard multiple people doing this, and it's ridiculous.
What part of it's not comparable?
If we're going to bring up strength of schedule, it's definitely comparable.
We can look at, I've also seen people cherry picking Georgia's strength of schedule from last year and say, well, Georgia's strength of schedule last year compared to Indiana's. Guys, Georgia still had to beat Alabama to get to the SEC champion championship.
Tell me who these teams got to beat. Tell me who Penn State has to beat.
I'm about to get there.
Nobody.
I'm about to get there. What I'm saying about with Indiana, it would be like us watching Georgia lose to Bama in the SEC championship game and then still putting Georgia in a position to win the national championship. That's what happens if Indiana loses this game this weekend. There's still that big hurdle. Michigan still had to beat Ohio State. We cannot use strength of schedule from last year.
You said if Indiana loses, what's their big hurdle?
Ohio State is their big hurdle.
No, I'm saying if they lose it, though, what's their big hurdle?
They don't really have one.
They don't have one.
After he's talking about,
which is why we have to
Yes.
factor in strength of schedule this year more so than in years past, because last year the hurdle existed. We valued conference championships. This year we have to value the fact that not all Big Ten schedules are created equal.
Here's why Florida
Not all
State's
SEC
comparable.
schedules
Because Florida
are created
State's
equal.
resume was weak last year, and they were highly ranked. Jordan Travis having an amazing season.
Right.
He gets hurt, and the argument explodes on does Florida State deserve to get in without their starting quarterback having a weak resume. Now, when we talk Indiana, they've beat nobody. They have no hurdles. If they go to Columbus and lose in Columbus, they literally have beaten nobody in this season. So my point is this. If we're having an argument about strength of schedule and what it matters to these teams right now, and you're sitting at 3, 4, and 5 having beaten nobody, then it absolutely matters when you have your chance.
But wait, there is one thing I think that we need to take into consideration with Indiana. We say they've beaten nobody. They've beaten no elite teams. But they've done what excellent teams do.
Beat the brakes off everybody. Yes,
They have hammered mediocre teams.
They beat the brakes off of Michigan? They beat them by 7.
You're going to give
Look
them
at the totality of the schedule.
So my point is this.
Everybody else
if we're going to say if you play nobody, you have to beat the brakes off of them, then the one team you played that was a challenge, you didn't beat the brakes off of them, it brings it into question. That's all I'm saying.
They beat Purdue.
Go ahead.
They're 11. If they
Who doesn't beat Purdue?
Hold on a second. If they go to the horseshoe and they lose by 14 points,
they're in.
They beat Purdue. They're 11-1.
They're in.
Okay, That's again. That's all. Y'all are saying if they're 11-1 and they haven't played anybody, we can't give them the benefit.
No. I think they're in. I think they're in either way.
Okay, let me ask you this. You keep bringing up haven't lost one. Is not losing a game the most important thing to you, or all of the one-loss teams are ranked ahead of the two-loss teams with a couple of exceptions once you get outside the top 12?
Rece, realizing that none of these schedules are going to be equal. When you're in the Big Ten and SEC, you can only play who's on the schedule.
I understand
that is all you can do. And when we look at Penn State and Indiana, two teams in the same conference, they have a common opponent in UCLA. So if you want to judge them by that, they have one team housed them, the other team struggled in State College. So all I'm saying is, what are we going to compare them to? We keep saying, to your point, we keep saying strength of schedule. They haven't played anybody. At some point, they're in the Big Ten.
I'm with you.
That's where they are.
They got to compete this weekend.
Okay, right.
This is amazing.
Let's do this.
I've never heard Booger respect the
This
Big
is all
Ten like
about
this.
numbers. Who's the better team? Doesn't that play into it? Can't you guys have all played at
Is
such a high
Indiana
level
better
you
than
can
Georgia
look
and
at it?
Alabama?
Are they better than them?
Is Indiana better than? We can do this all day.
No,
Is Indiana better?
Can you answer the question, please?
Are they better?
On a neutral field, Georgia's probably favored.
That answered my question.
On a neutral field, they're favored.
Okay, so my point is, when you start talking undefeated versus one loss versus two loss, our goal, the committee's goal, is to get the 12 best teams in this thing. So yes, when you have 106 strength of schedule, then it comes into question. And when you have to play one team, one tough team in a season, it comes into question because the SEC is a gauntlet. And it isn't just who you play, it's who you play after you've had to play a Georgia, a Texas, a Alabama, a Ole Miss.
It's such
All
a gauntlet.
these
Texas
matter.
hadn't played anybody.
I've never heard you respect the Big Ten like this, and I appreciate it.
It's such a gauntlet. Texas' best win is Vanderbilt.
That's what I said.
The SEC team should be evaluated against Indiana, against Notre Dame, against SMU, against whoever, regardless of what conference they're in. But their strength of schedule, by almost every strength of schedule metric you look at, better. Most of them. Now, Texas is mediocre. You're right. Texas needs to perform. And Indiana, for the people who say that, well, we got to make the results of the game matter. The results of the game matter, or Indiana wouldn't be in this conversation. It wouldn't be with 106 schedule. They've won the games. They've been impressive. That's why it matters. The games are mattering because they're ranked 5th. Heather Dinich does a great job covering all of this. She keeps a much calmer head than the four of us most of the time to try to evaluate what this. So, Heather, you've seen the latest edition of the rankings. Obviously, it's a big deal that Boise State, at the moment, would project to have a bye into the quarterfinals. What else do you see?
Well, I see that the ACC is in a better position than the Big 12, and here's why. I want to remind people how important conference championship games are. That's the one time of the whole season that the entire College Football Playoff Selection Committee is together watching those games. And if SMU beats Miami, I think that they jump in there and they get one of those first-round byes, whereas it's much more of a question if you have Colorado all the way down there, I want to say they're 16, against a BYU team that's already out. Then you bring into question what we have here, which is Boise State continuing to hold on to that first-round bye as one of the 4 highest-ranked conference champions. But here's another point to make, guys. Notre Dame Navy, right? Who is the biggest, Army, Notre Dame Army, if by chance Notre Dame loses that game, you know who should be the biggest Army fan right now? Tennessee and anyone else on that bubble, because I don't think that Notre Dame can survive a second loss. I certainly am not going to pick the Irish to lose to Army, but if they did, every team on the bubble, their hopes increase a little bit. I think those are 2 of the big points out of this.
Heather, it's a great point. Notre Dame right now projects to have a home game. And remember, the Irish can't be seeded higher than 5 because they don't have a conference to win. They also play USC. I think any loss would really put the Irish in trouble, whether it be Army or USC in the finale coming up a week from Saturday.